When I was 14, I learned how fast love can turn into something cold and cruel. Not from a stranger, or a classmate, or some random fight. From my own father. My name's Archer, and if there's one moment in my life that split everything into a before and an after, it was that night he threw my suitcase into the mud and told me, "Get out before I make you regret staying." I didn't say a word. I just turned around and walked into the storm. Rain pouring, wind howling, not even shoes on my feet, just wet socks and a hoodie that barely kept me warm. I didn't have a plan. I didn't have a phone. All I had was that voice in my head repeating his words, and the sound of my suitcase sinking into the mud behind me. But before that night, before everything shattered, there was a time I actually thought I was lucky. We lived in a modest house in northern Oregon, surrounded by pine trees and silence. My mom left when I was 8, just packed up one day and vanished from the narrative like a character who'd served her purpose. She didn't say goodbye to me, just left a note from my dad that I never got to read. After that, Dad changed. Not all at once. It was slow, like watching rot creep through the floorboards. At first, he was quiet, worked long hours, ate dinner in silence. And I tried. I really did. I was the kid who made spaghetti with way too much sauce just to get a smile. The one who folded his laundry without being asked. I used to write him notes on the back of napkins, stuff like, "Have a good day at work," and draw a stick figure of us fishing. But by the time I hit 13, the silence had hardened into something sharper. He'd snap over nothing. A dropped spoon. A light left on. "Useless," he muttered once when I spilled milk trying to make pancakes. I was scared to ask him things. Scared to breathe wrong around him. And I started doing what all scared kids do. I adapted. I got quieter. I did everything perfectly. Or at least, I tried. Because even when I did things right, there was always something wrong. If I got an A, he'd ask why it wasn't an A+. If I fixed the sink, he'd point out the mess I left behind. And if I spoke up, if I ever talked back or had an opinion, that's when the yelling started. But it wasn't just him. My older brother, Mason, was 18 at the time and already had Dad's approval locked in. Star football player, charming smile, always knew what to say. But beneath that varsity jacket was someone meaner than he let on. Especially when Dad wasn't watching. He used to mess with me in little ways, stealing my charger, hiding my homework, blaming things on me. And whenever I brought it up, Dad would just shake his head and say, "Stop being dramatic." Mason was the golden child. I was just the leftover. The only person in my corner was Aunt Ray, Dad's younger sister, who lived a couple towns over. She'd call every other weekend and ask how I was doing, and I'd always say, "I'm fine," because I didn't want to cause problems. But she saw through it. She always did. One time when she visited, I hugged her a little longer than usual, and I remember her whispering, "If you ever need anything, you call me. Day or night." I nodded, but I didn't think I'd ever have to. That changed in late September. It was a Thursday. I remember because we had meatloaf, and meatloaf meant Dad was in a halfway decent mood. I was sitting at the dinner table with my workbook out, trying to finish an algebra problem, when Mason walked in and tossed his muddy cleats right onto the counter. I stared at them for a second, not saying a word, just blinking. And then Dad looked up from his plate and said, "Why are you just sitting there? Clean that up." I opened my mouth. "But those aren't mine." Dad didn't even hesitate. "You live here, don't you?" I cleaned it. No one said thank you. No one even looked at me. Later that night, I went to take a shower, and my towel was missing. Again, Mason had this habit of taking my stuff, my charger, my socks, even my toothbrush once, and acting like it was no big deal. I walked into his room to ask for it back, and he just smiled and said, "Learn to share, loser." I didn't respond, just backed out of the room. I knew better than to start something under Dad's roof. But something in me cracked a little. The next day, I brought it up at dinner. I didn't plan to. I just couldn't take it anymore. "Can you tell Mason to stop taking my stuff?" I asked as calm as I could. Dad didn't even look up from his plate. "Don't be a snitch." But I said, "Drop it, Archer." I looked at Mason. He grinned, took a big bite of mashed potatoes, and said, "Maybe if you weren't such a girl about everything." I didn't touch my food that night. I went to bed hungry, with my stomach growling and my pillow damp. A few days later, Dad found out I'd been talking to Aunt Ray. He saw a text on the iPad, just a simple "thanks for checking in," and he lost it, grabbed the device, threw it across the room, and shouted, "You don't get to air our dirty laundry, you ungrateful brat." I tried to explain. I really did. She just asked how I was doing. I didn't say anything bad, but it didn't matter. His face was red, his voice louder than I'd ever heard it. If you want to talk about this family like some victim, then maybe you shouldn't be a part of it. That night, I locked my bedroom door. I pushed my desk chair under the knob, even though I knew it wouldn't help. I didn't sleep. I stared at the ceiling, wondering what I'd done to make him hate me so much. Wondering if Mom left because of him, or because of me. The next morning, everything felt off. Like the air was charged. I came downstairs to find my suitcase in the hallway, half packed with clothes I didn't even remember folding. Dad was standing by the door. Mason was nowhere in sight. The TV was off. No sound, just the dripping of rain outside. Dad looked at me with a cold, flat stare and said, "You think you're old enough to talk about me behind my back? Fine. Be a man. Go live like one." "What?" I blinked. "You heard me. You want to whine to your aunt so much? Go live with her. Let's see how long you last." "Dad," my voice cracked. "I don't even have shoes on. It's raining." He opened the door. The wind howled in. And then he did it. He picked up my suitcase and threw it down the front steps, straight into the mud. "Get out before I make you regret staying." I didn't move. Not at first. I just stood there, frozen, hoping he'd say it was a joke. That he'd close the door. That he'd laugh and say something like, "See how it feels when you mess with me?" But he didn't. He stepped aside and pointed to the storm. So I walked. I didn't even look back. I just pulled my hoodie tighter, stepped over my soaked suitcase, and started walking. My socks were wet within seconds. My breath came out in little clouds. I didn't know where I was going. I just knew I couldn't stay. I walked for almost an hour before I remembered Aunt Ray. I found an old gas station with a payphone outside and asked the clerk for change. He looked me up and down, muddy, soaked, shivering, and just handed me the coins without a word. She answered on the second ring. "Archer." Her voice cracked. "Where are you?" And that was the first time I cried. Not just tears, but full-body sobs. I couldn't even talk. I just held the phone to my ear and let it all out. She found me 20 minutes later, pulled up in her beat-up Subaru, wrapped me in a blanket, and didn't say a word until I was warm and safe inside. Then she said something I'll never forget. "I know. I've been waiting for this." I didn't understand what she meant at the time. I just thought she meant she'd always known he was a bad dad. But a month later, I found out what she was really waiting for. Because it turns out, she recorded the call. The one where he screamed at me, told me to get out, threatened me. Every word. Every vile, twisted sentence. He didn't know she'd called the house that night. Didn't know she was on the line when he told me I'd regret staying. Didn't know she had proof. And when he made a joke a month later, bragging to a neighbor about teaching me a lesson, laughing like it was all some rite of passage, he had no idea what Aunt Ray was about to do with that recording. The first week living with Aunt Ray felt like stepping into an alternate reality. Her house smelled like cinnamon and old books. The couch cushions were soft, not worn down to the springs. And she listened when I talked, really listened. She made French toast on Sundays, let me sleep in the guest room without asking when I'd go back, and never once pushed me to explain. For a while, I convinced myself that maybe I could just start over here. That maybe family didn't have to mean fear. But then the voicemail started. "Archer, it's your father. You made your point. Time to come home." Click. 2 days later. "You've been gone long enough. Your room's still there." Click. Then, "You think I don't know what this is about? Ray's always hated me. Don't let her poison you." Each message was colder than the last. By the fifth one, he wasn't even pretending anymore. "You walk out of this house like that, and think you can just live off my sister? You better grow up fast, boy. No one's gonna carry you." I never replied. I didn't even listen to most of them. Aunt Ray would check the messages while I was at school and delete the worst ones before I could hear them. I only found out because I saw her crying in the kitchen one night, clutching her phone like it was burning her hand. She didn't know I'd walked in. Didn't know I'd seen the raw pain in her eyes. "He used to be different," she whispered, mostly to herself. That's when I started sleeping with a chair against the door again. Not because I thought he'd show up, but because the feeling was back. That tight, crawling fear in my chest. The one that made me flinch when someone raised their voice too fast. Still, I was doing better. School was easier. I actually made a couple friends. I joined the art club and painted something for the first time since Mom left. It was a dark forest, with one figure walking out of it and into the light. I didn't tell anyone it was about me, but Ray hung it on the fridge anyway. And for a few weeks, I thought maybe that was it. Maybe I could leave the old house and everything in it behind. Then came the court summons. Aunt Ray sat me down at the dining table with two envelopes. One was addressed to her, the other to me. I opened mine with shaking fingers. Inside was a legal notice. My father was filing for custody. I remember blinking at it for a long time, not really understanding what I was seeing. But he kicked me out, I finally said. Ray nodded, lips tight. I know. He's saying he didn't. That you ran away. That I manipulated you. I stared at her. That's insane. It's a power move, she said quietly. He doesn't care about the truth. He cares about control. In the weeks that followed, everything shifted. School was no longer an escape. It became a spotlight. Teachers were contacted. My attendance records pulled. My old guidance counselor, Mr. Salas, who once said I was resilient, now had to write a statement about family conflict. Ray got a lawyer, but she couldn't afford one full-time. We had a few meetings, took notes, submitted Aunt Ray's recorded call as evidence. But Dad denied everything. He claimed it was taken out of context, that he lost his temper for 5 seconds, and that I'd exaggerated everything. And Mason? He backed it all up. Said I'd always been dramatic. Said I ran away over a minor disagreement. He even had the audacity to tell the court that he carried me inside crying once after I scraped my knee and Archer bit me because he thought it was funny. I hadn't even touched him that day. I'd fallen off my bike, and he'd laughed. That was it. That was the real story. And I realized something horrifying. They were rewriting my life. Page by page. Line by line. And the people reading it had never lived in that house. Never heard Dad's voice when it turned to ice. Never saw Mason step on my drawings and say, oops. Never saw the bruises that were accidents. The broken things that were always my fault. They didn't know. But Ray knew. And she fought. She gathered every text, every voicemail, every witness statement she could. One of my old teachers, Ms. Larson, wrote a letter about the time I came to school with my shoes held together by tape, even though my dad had just bought Mason brand new Jordans. He told me he didn't want to bother his father by asking for new ones, she wrote. He said it like it made perfect sense. Despite that, the case dragged. Weeks turned into months. Court dates rescheduled. Lawyers delayed. And all the while, the tension kept building. My father sent letters now, handwritten ones. Always on yellow legal paper, like he was trying to look official. The handwriting was sharp and slanted. You're embarrassing yourself. Come home, and we'll forget this happened. You think Ray can protect you? She couldn't protect her own marriage. She's using you to get back at me. Wake up. He even included a photocopy of my birth certificate once. Like that meant anything. Like that piece of paper gave him the right to pretend he hadn't thrown me out in the rain with nothing. Then came Thanksgiving. Aunt Ray invited a few family members over, her cousin Jeremy, some friends from church. I was nervous, but it turned out okay. Until the knock at the door. It was Mason, standing there with that same smug grin, holding a pie. Ray blocked the doorway. What are you doing here? Dad said to bring this over. You know, as a gesture. He looked past her and spotted me in the living room. Hey, Arch, nice place. Bet it doesn't have secret cameras though, right? I didn't answer, just stared at him. Because in that moment, something clicked. Secret cameras. That wasn't just a jab. That was a confession. A slip. A glimpse into something deeper. Ray didn't have cameras. But my father did. Ray closed the door in his face. Didn't even take the pie. We sat in silence afterward, the tension thick enough to cut. 2 days later, our lawyer got an anonymous email. It had 3 video files attached, all from inside my old house. One from the kitchen, one from the garage, one from the front porch. The first showed Mason cornering me with my backpack, dumping it out and mocking me while I tried to gather my things. You could hear me saying, please stop. I have homework in there. And Mason replying, do it again, loser. Maybe you'll cry this time. The second showed Dad screaming at me, calling me a parasite, telling me to earn my keep or get out. It ended with him punching the wall so hard the drywall cracked. The third was the night I left. You could see him grab the suitcase, shout those same words, get out before I make you regret staying, and hurl it into the mud. You could see me standing there, frozen, then turning and walking into the storm. We watched all 3 in silence. My hands shook. Ray looked pale. And then we realized, these weren't recordings Aunt Ray made. These were from my father's own cameras. He had them installed all around the house, probably to keep tabs on Mason. Or maybe to protect himself in some twisted way. But someone, maybe a tech guy, maybe Mason's friend, maybe a former employee, had sent them to our lawyer. I don't know who. To this day, I still don't. But it changed everything. The lawyer submitted them to the judge the next day. And that's when things started to unravel. But before we could even get to the next hearing, Dad made one final play. He showed up at my school. It was raining again, just like that night. I was walking toward the front gate when I heard his voice. Low, calm, calculated. Archer. I froze. He was standing under a black umbrella, wearing his old work jacket like nothing had happened. Like he hadn't tried to erase me. I just want to talk. I backed away. He stepped forward. Don't be stupid. It doesn't have to end like this. You come home, and all this goes away. A teacher spotted us and stepped in. Told him he wasn't allowed on school grounds. He left without a fight, but not without a look. That look. That one that said, this isn't over. I went home that day and found Aunt Ray already waiting, hands gripping her coffee mug so tight her knuckles were white. He knows the videos got out, she said. And then, almost in a whisper, he's scared. I nodded. But I wasn't. Not anymore. Because for the first time in my life, I had the truth. And the storm was finally coming for him. But the betrayal that broke everything? That one wasn't from my father. It came 2 days later. From someone I never expected. From someone who knew my story. Someone who had promised to protect me. And that betrayal was worse than every voicemail, every slap, every suitcase in the mud. But I'll get to that. Because it all started with a phone call. A phone call from Child Services. The woman on the other end of the line introduced herself as a caseworker from Child Protective Services. She spoke clearly, like she'd rehearsed it, but there was something brittle in her voice. Aunt Ray stood beside me, clutching her mug of cold tea. My throat felt tight before the woman even said the words. Your mother has come forward, she said. She's requested to be added as a guardian. For a second, the world tilted. My mother. The same woman who vanished 6 years ago without a word. No phone call. No letters. No birthday cards. Nothing but a vague memory of her standing by the door, one hand on her purse, whispering, I'll be right back, before stepping out and never returning. I barely remembered what her voice sounded like. Is this a joke? Aunt Ray said sharply. No, ma'am. She's filed official paperwork. The claim is that she left due to a dangerous situation and thought it was safer to stay away until now. She says she's ready to be a mother again. I didn't know what to say. My skin went cold. I wasn't angry. I wasn't even sad. I just felt hollow, like someone had scooped out all the parts of me that could feel and left nothing behind. After the call, I sat on the porch in silence. It was late November, and the wind had that knife-sharp edge that meant winter was coming. Aunt Ray came out and sat beside me. She didn't say anything at first, just passed me a blanket and waited. Do you want to talk about it? She finally asked. No. Okay. And that was it. No pressure. No guilt. Just space. But the truth is, I didn't even know how I felt. I'd spent years building a version of my mom in my head. The kind who maybe cried herself to sleep thinking about me, who sent anonymous birthday gifts or kept a photo of me in her wallet. A mom who would have stayed if only she could. Now I had to rewrite that version. And what I saw instead wasn't pretty. In the weeks that followed, I watched my world unravel for the second time. My father was still pushing for custody, clinging to whatever shred of power he had left. Mason had gone radio silent. No texts, no taunts, just a blank space that felt even creepier than usual. And now my mother was back, pretending to be a parent. She didn't even try to reach out to me directly. Her lawyer spoke for her. Told the court she had a stable job, a 2-bedroom apartment in a quiet area, and a therapist who said she was ready to reconnect. She even submitted a statement claiming she'd left to protect me from my father's temper. But she didn't explain why she never contacted Aunt Ray, or me, or anyone. The judge agreed to a temporary meeting. Supervised. Just 1 hour. Aunt Ray didn't want me to go. Said it was my choice. But I said yes. Maybe part of me still needed to see her. To understand. We met in a neutral space, a quiet room with glass walls, a social worker nearby. I walked in and saw her sitting at the table, hands folded in her lap, wearing a soft gray sweater and too much perfume. Her hair was darker than I remembered. Her face looked older, tired, but familiar in a way that hurt. Hi, baby, she said, standing up. I didn't move. She sat down again. You look just like your brother. I sat across from her. You know Mason's not really my brother, right? She blinked, startled. Of course he is. No, he's your stepson. From Dad's first marriage. You knew that. She looked down at her hands. I didn't come here to argue. Then why did you come? Her voice dropped. Because I made a mistake. And I want to fix it. I stared at her. It's been 6 years. I know. You didn't even call. I couldn't. Why? Her eyes filled with tears. Because I was scared. I didn't know how to come back. I thought he would hurt you if I did. And then time passed. And I just froze. That's not good enough. She looked like she'd been slapped. I know. I'm not asking you to forgive me. I just want a chance to try. But it was too late. Something inside me had already snapped. After that, I refused all other visits. The court allowed her to submit letters, but I didn't read them. Aunt Ray kept them in a drawer, in case I changed my mind. I never did. And then came the worst blow of all. We lost the case. Not to my father. Not to my mother. To neither. The judge declared the situation too complex for immediate custody and placed me under temporary state guardianship. Aunt Ray was allowed supervised visits, but I wasn't allowed to live with her full-time until a full investigation was completed. It was like being erased. One day, I was living with the only adult who ever made me feel safe. The next, I was packing my things for a foster home. Ray fought it, filed every appeal she could, but the system moved slow. And in the meantime, I was sent to live with strangers. They weren't bad people, just distant. I was placed with a middle-aged couple named Jeff and Corinne who had 2 other foster kids, both younger than me. They gave me a bed, some quiet, and cereal in the morning. But it wasn't home. It wasn't Ray. That winter was the lowest point of my life. I stopped drawing. I stopped talking much. School felt pointless. I walked through each day like a ghost, showing up, answering when called on, eating just enough to not be noticed. People stopped asking how I was. Even the counselor gave up after the 3rd. I'm fine. But slowly, very slowly, I began to rebuild. It started with a single sketch. One night, unable to sleep, I pulled out the cheap notebook the foster parents gave me and started to draw. It was messy, rushed, but something came out. A cabin in the woods, surrounded by snow, with one figure inside holding a lantern. I didn't know what it meant, but it felt true. From there, it snowballed. I started spending my lunches in the art room. The teacher, Mr. Kwan, didn't ask questions, just handed me supplies and let me work. Eventually, he started giving me advice, showed me how to use charcoal properly. Let me borrow books. Your work has a voice, he said once. Let it speak. I did. And by spring, I had a full portfolio. Ray visited every week. We'd sit in the park with vending machine hot chocolate and talk. She'd bring me updates about the case, about the letters piling up from Mom, about Mason's sudden disappearance from school. Apparently, he got caught plagiarizing a final paper and dropped out. But more than anything, she just listened. You're stronger than both of them, she said once. I didn't believe her then, but something was shifting. By the end of the school year, Mr. Kwan encouraged me to enter a statewide art competition. I didn't think I had a chance, but I submitted 3 pieces anyway. One of a boy standing in the rain with a suitcase, one of a forest clearing with torn shoes at the center, and one of Aunt Ray's kitchen window with warm yellow light spilling out. A month later, I got a call. I'd won 2nd place. They printed my work in a catalog, sent me a small scholarship. Mr. Kwan framed the piece of the kitchen window and hung it in his classroom. It was the first time I saw my name printed next to the word artist. Something cracked open after that. Not all at once, but enough. The foster couple noticed, started giving me more space, more trust. One of the younger kids, Jeremy, asked if I could draw his favorite comic book character. I did. He pinned it to his wall. That summer, Ray's appeal finally reached the right judge. This one saw the footage, heard the voicemails, reviewed the therapist's notes, and finally, after months of waiting, I was allowed to return home. When I walked through Aunt Ray's door again, it smelled like cinnamon and books, just like I remembered. She'd even saved my old hoodie, washed and folded on the bed. Welcome home, kid, she said. I hugged her tighter than I ever had. And that night, for the first time in a long time, I slept without pushing a chair against the door. But it wasn't over, because while I was rebuilding, someone else was unraveling. My father had been quiet. Too quiet. The court ruling stripped him of parental rights indefinitely. He didn't appeal, didn't send another letter, didn't show up anywhere. But then one day, Ray opened her mailbox and found a plain manila envelope. Inside were documents, screenshots, photos, proof that someone had been spying on us, messages between my father and someone else, someone who had been feeding him information. And when we saw the name on those messages, when we saw who had been helping him track my every move, that was the moment everything changed. Because it wasn't Mason. It wasn't my mom. It was someone I trusted. It was a Tuesday morning when Aunt Ray opened the envelope. She didn't say anything at first, just stood by the kitchen window, motionless, as the pale sun filtered through the curtains and spilled across the counter. I was halfway through buttering toast when I noticed her hands, tied on the paper, knuckles white. "Ray?" I asked. She didn't look at me, just turned and placed the papers down slowly, like they might explode if handled wrong. "You should read this." There were no stamps, no return address, just a plain manila envelope, the kind you see in courtroom dramas. Inside were about 24 printed pages, screenshots of text messages, a few blurry photos, and one grainy image that made my blood freeze. It was me, sitting alone on a park bench with my sketchbook open, dated 3 weeks ago. The screenshots were worse. Conversations, dozens of them, some between my dad and someone labeled S, others between the same number and another contact marked, "Tell him when alone." The messages were clipped, purposeful, but the tone was unmistakable. "He's starting to draw again. Must be stable. Might be good time to approach. And is relaxed. Still lets him walk to school alone on Thursdays. Leave it to me. I'll keep you updated." I felt like my spine had turned to ice. Then Ray pulled out the final page. A bank transaction. $10,000. Transferred from my father's account to my school counselor, Mr. Salas. I stared at the name. The man who used to give me Jolly Ranchers during math anxiety breakdowns. The one who told me it was okay to cry after my first panic attack. The one who, apparently, was telling my father where I went, how I felt, and what I was doing, under the guise of mental health check-ins. He'd betrayed me. I don't even remember dropping the toast. Just that I was suddenly sitting on the floor with my head between my knees, breathing too fast. Ray knelt beside me. "You're okay," she whispered. "He can't hurt you now." But it wasn't just about hurt anymore. It was about violation. That man sat across from me for months. Asked how I slept, how I ate, if I ever felt unsafe. And I answered him. I told him things I didn't tell anyone. About the night I walked into the storm. About waking up in cold sweats, thinking I'd hear my father's boots outside the door. And he passed it all on. For money. That night, I didn't draw. I didn't sleep. I sat in the living room while Ray made calls. To our lawyer. To the school. To the police. But inside, something was shifting. That old version of me. The one who flinched at door slams. Who tried to be invisible just to stay safe. He was still in there. But he wasn't steering the ship anymore. Now, something colder was. Not angry. Not broken. Just focused. Because knowledge is power. And now I had a lot of it. Ray's lawyer came over the next day with a face like he'd just found gold. The messages weren't just betrayal, they were evidence. Clear, undeniable proof of tampering with a custody investigation, endangering a minor, and unlawful surveillance. "This is your hammer," he said, tapping the folder. "But you need to swing it carefully." We had options. We could press charges against Mr. Salas. Leak the messages to the district. Sue for damages. Use the screenshots in court to permanently sever all legal ties between me and my father. But most of that would take time. Paperwork. Bureaucracy. And it still wouldn't expose them the way they deserved. They wanted control. They wanted to play puppet master. Fine. Let's see how they liked it when the strings snapped. First step was gathering allies. Ray reached out to Ms. Larson, the teacher who had written me a character letter during the custody battle. We didn't know it at the time, but she had once been reprimanded for calling out Mr. Salas for prioritizing reputation over student safety. She agreed to help, no hesitation. Then came Principal Duran, a stern woman with steel gray hair and a no-nonsense attitude. Ray arranged a private meeting, and we showed her the documents. At first, she looked skeptical. She'd known Salas for years. But the proof was overwhelming. The photos, the texts, the money. She didn't say much. Just picked up the phone and said, "I want him placed on immediate administrative leave. Effective today." I didn't see him again after that. But word spread quickly. Students talked. Teachers whispered in hallways. And I kept my head down, letting it all stir like a pot ready to boil over. Next step, the leverage. Ray contacted a local journalist she knew from her college days, Ben Murphy, an investigative reporter with a reputation for chewing up predators and spitting out headlines. We met at a diner off the highway. Ben wore a corduroy jacket, took notes with a real pen, and didn't interrupt once while I talked. When I finished telling him everything, from the night in the storm to the manila envelope, he looked me dead in the eye and said, "This isn't just a story. This is a reckoning." We handed him copies of the documents. He promised to run the piece with everything, names redacted for now, but full context. And when the article dropped, we'd be ready with the next blow. Because here's the thing, I knew my father. He was proud, obsessive, but careful. He operated in shadows, behind closed doors and legal jargon. His entire identity was built on control, the image, the illusion, and I was going to shatter that illusion in front of everyone. But not just by exposing him, by beating him at his own game. We started with a motion to reverse the guardianship record. With the new evidence of Salas interference, Ray's lawyer petitioned to nullify the prior decision and retroactively declare my placement in state care a wrongful separation. It worked. After a brief review, the court ruled in our favor. All records would be updated to show that I had been unlawfully removed from Ray's care due to compromised testimony. I was officially hers again. But we didn't stop there. Using Ray's background in finance, something I'd never really understood until now, we began digging deeper into my father's bank statements, the ones included in the court discovery file. And that's when we found something strange. A second transfer, not 10,000, 25, made out to an LLC under a fake name. Address listed as an out-of-use P.O. box in Idaho. But with some careful triangulation and Ben's help, we traced it back to Mason, the golden boy. Apparently, he hadn't dropped out of college. He'd been paid to take a leave of absence and keep an eye on me. He'd used burner accounts to update Dad, posed as classmates, even got someone to tail Ray once and send him photos. All of it funded by hush money. But here's where it gets worse. He hadn't just been spying. He'd been planning something bigger. In the screenshots from his texts to Dad, we found references to a backup option, a plan to get me to crack, to push me until I lashed out. Maybe get me arrested. Maybe recorded in some outburst. Something that could be used to show I was unstable. And it almost worked. That winter when I was in foster care, I had come so close to exploding. But I didn't. I rebuilt. And now I had the blueprint of their whole operation. So we made a plan. Ben would publish the article 2 days before the next court date, a hearing set to permanently terminate my father's rights. We'd release the evidence in phases, each more damning than the last. And at the end of it all, I'd take the stand one final time, not as a scared kid begging to be heard, but as someone who knew exactly what had been done to him, who saw through the lies, who came back anyway. The courtroom felt colder than I remembered. It wasn't the temperature, it was the atmosphere. Stiff backs, quiet coughs, the subtle click of pens on notepads as reporters filled the rows, including one familiar face in the back, Ben Murphy, wearing that same corduroy jacket, a half-smile tugging at the edge of his mouth. He gave me a nod. I returned it. This time, I wasn't hiding behind Aunt Ray's shoulder. I walked in with her by my side, head held high, file folder in hand. Inside that folder were printed screenshots, bank transfers, school logs, and every lie I had carried like bricks on my back. I'd spent the past year climbing out from under them. Now, I was going to drop them right on top of the people who put them there. My father sat at the defense table, arms crossed, jaw set. Mason wasn't with him. Neither was my mother. And for once, he didn't look smug. He looked small. Angry, yes, but with an edge of desperation I hadn't seen before. He had a new lawyer, slick suit, perfect hair, empty eyes. The kind of man who thought courtroom drama was beneath him until it cost him his reputation. The judge entered. The bailiff called the room to order. And just like that, everything began. The first part was procedural. Reintroduction of evidence. Summary of prior custody battles. But then came the turning point. The motion to present new evidence of interference and misconduct. Ray's lawyer rose and handed the judge a thick packet of documents. We are submitting evidence that Mr. Salas, the child's school counselor, was financially compensated by the respondent, Mr. Archer's father, in exchange for confidential information about the minor's behavior, location, and emotional state. There were gasps, audible ones. Even the judge blinked. But we weren't done. Next came the footage. Not just the old videos from the porch and kitchen, but the new ones, security camera clips that Ben had helped recover from public areas, showing Mason parked near Ray's home, trailing me, taking photos, and talking to an unidentified man in a black SUV registered to a shell company. Ray's lawyer didn't even raise her voice. She just laid it out, piece by piece. Calm, precise, devastating. And, Your Honor, we also have evidence that a sum of $25,000 was transferred to a dormant LLC, an entity tied to Mason Carter, the respondent's son. This payment coincided with targeted surveillance, coordinated contact attempts, and a suspected plan to provoke Mr. Archer into a violent outburst during his time in foster care. The judge turned to my father. Do you have a response? He opened his mouth, but for once, nothing came out. His lawyer stood, muttered something about not being aware of these developments, and requested time to review. Denied. The judge looked at me. Mr. Archer, would you like to speak? My palms were sweating. My heart hammered in my ears. But I stood up. I do. The bailiff guided me to the stand. I sat, took a breath. My name is Archer. I'm 15 years old, and I'd like to tell you what it's like to be thrown out of your own house with no shoes, in the middle of a storm, because your father didn't like that you talked to someone who cared about you. I paused, let the words land. He told me I'd regret staying. He made sure of it. But what he didn't count on was me remembering everything. Every insult. Every time he called me useless. Every time Mason laughed while he stepped on my stuff. Every time I flinched when a drawer slammed. I glanced at my father. You wanted me scared. You got what you wanted. But fear didn't make me weak. It made me pay attention. And that's why I'm here today. Because I remember. And now so does the court. Silence. Not a sound in the room. Even my father didn't look at me anymore. He was staring down at his hands, gripping the edge of the table like it might keep him from sinking. The judge leaned forward. Thank you, Archer. That was very brave. The rest of the hearing moved quickly. Mr. Salas was officially placed under investigation. A school board representative confirmed he'd been terminated. The district was already conducting damage control. Mason was issued a subpoena for financial fraud and harassment of a minor. He didn't show up in court, but an investigator confirmed he'd fled to Nevada. An arrest warrant was filed. My father, stripped of all parental rights, permanently. He was also referred to the state attorney for obstruction of justice, endangerment, and tampering with a custody investigation. His lawyer requested a private sidebar, but the judge denied it. Everything stayed on record. The gavel came down at 11:42 a.m., and just like that, it was over. But the fallout came fast. Ben's article dropped the next morning. The headline? Father paid to sabotage custody case. School counselor, son implicated in secret surveillance scheme against teen. It went viral within hours. Local news stations picked it up. Social media exploded. My father's job, regional director of an insurance firm, terminated his contract within the day. His reputation, the one he built on networking and charity galas, burned to ash in the public square. Photos of Mason surfaced, on boats, at bars, in places no college dropout should afford. His vacation account vanished, but the screenshots lived on. Salas? His license was suspended. The district board issued a public apology. Lawsuits began piling up, not just from us, but from other students who realized they'd been manipulated or dismissed under his care. As for my mother, she vanished again. No forwarding address. No appeal. No explanation. And this time, I didn't care. Because I didn't need her. I had Aunt Ray, who stuck through every hearing, every breakdown, every impossible conversation, who kept my drawings in her office and left sticky notes with dumb jokes on my mirror, who never once made me feel like I owed her something for staying. In the weeks after the ruling, we got dozens of messages. Strangers, survivors, other teens who read my story and saw themselves in it. Some called me brave. Others just said, thank you. I didn't respond to most of them, but I read every single one. Because every word reminded me of something I used to forget. I wasn't invisible. I was real. I was here. And I had survived. Ray took me out to dinner the night the article broke. Nothing fancy, just our favorite diner, greasy fries and all. We sat by the window booth, like always. You okay? She asked. Getting there. She smiled. That's all I need to hear. I reached into my backpack and pulled out a folded piece of paper. Got something for you. It was a drawing. Not of the storm. Not of the court. Not of my father. It was her. In the kitchen, sun shining behind her, arms folded, expression stubborn but kind. She was standing in front of the fridge with my drawing pinned to it, the one of the boy leaving the woods. Ray stared at it for a long time. Then her eyes got glassy. "You little punk," she whispered. "I know." We laughed. And for the first time in over a year, I felt light. That night, I went to sleep without fear. No chair against the door. No jumping at creaks in the floorboards. Just a window cracked open, a breeze whispering through, and the soft hum of Ray's kettle boiling downstairs. The past hadn't vanished, but it no longer owned me. My father once told me I'd regret staying. He was right about one thing. I do have regrets, but none of them are about walking away from him. Because sometimes, the best revenge is simply getting to grow up, and they don't get to follow you where you're going. I closed my eyes and let that truth settle deep in my bones, warm and unshakable. I had survived the storm. Now, I was learning how to live in the sunlight.